G'day everybody, Australian Belarus here, but of course I'm in Mexico City and I want to talk about the topic of Russian women today. And it's a very polarizing topic and with good reason, right? And I just want to go through some of the theory and just understanding so you understand why some people love Russian women, some people despise them. I want to go through and explain to you today. So I would say that if a guy hasn't had a lot of experience with Russian women, he'll typically think very positively of them because they present well. Yep. They don't eat too much, they grow their hair, they kind of wear tighter clothes, often very hyper feminine clothes, but kind of sweet semi-sexual feminine, not like soft girl, like Asian baby girl kind of style, and not like, you know, full skanky kind of prosy kind of vibes. They're kind of in the middle. It's kind of really desirable look, right? So the average guy thinks, oh fuck, they're not fat, they're not slutty for the most part, therefore they must be good traditional girls, right? So in general, people that don't really know much about culture or the mentality of these kind of post-Soviet Union countries, they generally have a pretty good impression of Russian women. However, men that have some more practical experience, and I guess enough to understand or see some patterns in behaviour, they're often quite bitter and quite just kind of anti-Russian women, I guess. Sorry, I can't look at you all the time. I'm the footpaths where I am, or the sidewalks where I am, man, they're pretty choppy. So I'm just trying not to roll an ankle. So I'm just going to give you a bit of eye, then not a bit of eye, bit of eye, bit of eye, not a bit of eye. All right. So let me explain to you about, in a very simple nutshell, about Russian culture. It's a little bit more individualistic. Yeah, it's a little bit more independent. It's less community orientated. It's less friendship orientated. It's less social orientated. And people are probably just a bit more selfish. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. And of course, it's born out of just a lack of trust in the Soviet system in general and of each other and kind of being trained in that way, right? So if you think of a bell curve, do you guys know statistics? I hope you've done like a first year course in stats or even just like high school or something. So you have like a distribution curve, right? And essentially what that means is that what we tend to see is when there's two extreme traits, so let's say very selfish, very narcissistic down one end, and then very empathetic, very kind, caring, giving down the other end. What we tend to find is that most people cluster kind of in the middle. They're a bit of both. And the more extreme you get to either side, right? So the more narcissistic or selfish you get, or the more like really empathetic and caring and warm and loving you become, there's less and less people qualify for that. So you have this kind of distribution curve of not many, lots in the middle, and then down not many at the other end. So in the West we have this, and you know, the top couple of percent of narcissism, they're probably pretty extreme, right? But Russia has a similar curve, but the curve is tilted a bit more towards the selfish individualist end. So basically what you have is that maybe extreme 5% of Russians, in this case Russian women, are more narcissistic than anyone in the West. Yeah, you get what I'm saying? And then there'll be down the other end, there'll be a level of empathy in the West that is not replicated in Russian society, right? Now, this 5% of girls, they don't bond with people. Yep. They have no real friendships, no real social connections, and they see men only as a vehicle to get what they want, right? So it's important you understand that. They simply are just not capable of loving. Yeah, this 5% of girls, yeah? They're very mercantile. This is often the word used, and it kind of translates, this is a Russian word, obviously, mercantile, but of course it translates to mercantile in English, although we don't use it in this context in English, but it just means like business orientated, but in terms of with a man, right? So it's like very transactional. I think in the West we'd use the word transactional to describe this. So these girls are really just not capable of loving. They just don't have it in them for whatever reason. And now these women though, if you go into say Russia or Moscow, they tend to gravitate towards Moscow obviously, but they're everywhere. If you go to Russia or Moscow and you think, okay, the top 5% or the bottom 5% are like hyper narcissistic. You think, okay, well, there's only a 1 in 20 chance of meeting that girl. But of course, these girls are kind of perma singles, right? They're perma singles. So most people in Russia, look, they get together really young, yeah? Like most people are really, especially second tier cities and below, like smaller cities, most people are snapped up by 18, 19. You're not going to meet many 21, 22-year-olds that are single. You know, it just doesn't happen. Then when you get to past a certain age, say 25, you just end up with these perma singles. So you're literally going to meet that 5%, right? They're the ones that are available, plus some other ones, but you really got this massive sample bias. So if you go to Moscow and you try to date and find girls, these girls will look good, right? They look good. They will work out. They'll wear really sexy clothes. They'll grow their hair. They understand that the investment that they put on themselves, that they can get that plus sum from a man. Yeah. So they're not looking good because they're oppressed by the patriarchy. Yeah. They're looking good for their own self-interest. And these girls are very open to meeting foreigners or meeting anyone, right? So foreign guys will meet these girls, and then they're kind of used, and then kind of wonder why, right? And then this happens enough times to them, and they start to think all Russian girls are like this. But unfortunately, it's really not true. It's really not a fair representation of Russian women, but it is. I'm just going to wait for these people to go past me. It's kind of loud. But what it does is gives guys a sense that all Russian women are like this, and they're really not. But the Russian women who are more decent never get on the market, right? They're never on the shelf. They get snapped up by that cute guy in first year that sat next to them in first year university, or the neighbour in the village or whatever, right? Now, if you want to see this on hyperdrive, you leave Russia. Because the most extreme girls, they will leave Russia to a capital city near you, and they're kind of open to meeting quickly, right? So guys will meet with them. And of course, these girls, again, they don't care about men. They're never going to love a man. They're like ruthless players, right? But the playing is for resource extraction. Whereas for a man, if he's a player, well, what does that mean? Well, he's trying to get laid, right? Without paying any money or committing to a girl. But a ruthless player as a girl, we don't really get this in the West that much, yeah? But this kind of top 5% or bottom 5% of Russian girls, that's the game they play. They're just looking to get as much as they can from a man. And you think, gee, that's pathetic. Like, you're really going to go on a date with a guy for 3 hours for like a $20 dinner. And just because you want the dinner, right? But there's something in these women that it's not the financial exchange per se, but it's like the fact that they got it. You know what I mean? And they got it from a guy. It's like there's some ego boost or some, I don't know what it is. Because like a guy, it's the same thing, right? Like a guy, if he invests several $100s in a date and maybe spends hours and hours with a girl just to have sex once, he could have gone to a prostitute for less, right? So it's the same. Girls have the same mentality. These extreme Russian girls have the same mentality. They like get an ego boost from not having to pay for it themselves. You know what I mean? So anyway, because of this, and because of a lot of the girls who leave Russia have this really extreme hypergamy, guys who maybe have been out with a few Russians, they tend to think that all Russian girls are like this. Now, of course, they're not, you know. And other traveling Russians and girls that have left the country, they have different archetypes. It's not all this kind of hardcore kind of resource extracting thought, right? There are other archetypes too, but the dominant archetype is this girl. So I'll just turn you around because I am in an interesting part of the world. I'm in kind of the edge of La Condesa and Roma in Mexico City. I'll just turn it around as I walk and stop looking at my beautiful head for a few minutes. So yeah, I think that because of this shifting of the bell curve and because that normal Russian girls, they're just not accessible. They're not accessible for the average guy because they're snapped up at a young age, right? These are dating markets in a place like Russia. My goodness, they're efficient and they're fast, you know. So basically, yeah, men never get, or foreign men never really get access. Any man who's dating in the 23-year-old plus pool, like they never, dogs. I've actually made another video about the dogs, the dog pet thing going on here. Can look out for that one soon if I don't release it before this one. So you may be thinking, all right, Benjamin, thanks for that information, mate. I really appreciate it. Now, what do I do with it? Well, I'll give you a golden rule to assess how gold diggery a Russian girl, but any girl, how gold diggery any girl is. You can almost tell instantly, right? So you look at them. How much have they invested in themselves to make themselves look good, sexually desirable? And how does that compare to the average in their culture, right? Everywhere you go in the world, compare the girl, how much is she sexualizing herself, right? highly correlated with narcissism. Yeah, they're not doing it because they're oppressed by the patriarchy again. Just in case you're really that retarded and believe that. They're doing it for themselves, right? And the more extreme they are, the more they're trying to sexualize themselves, the more narcissistic they tend to be. Yeah, it's a pretty close to a one-to-one relationship. It can be more complicated, but in general, that's what we're looking at, yeah? So you just look at a girl, you think, okay, this is Russian girl. How does she compare to other girls in Russia? Where does she sit on that bell curve? And the more she is towards the hypersexualized end, the more narcissistic she'll be, and the less desirable she'll be as a long-term partner. The less capable she is of simply loving somebody, the more transactional it is. And when you're going to this kind of top 5% or bottom 5% of girls, it's difficult for the average Western man to actually understand how ruthless and cold they are, and how, I'm just going to try and get across this road. It's really a blind corner, but I think we got this, guys. Let's do it. We got across. How ruthless and cold-blooded they are. It's really hard for men to appreciate because they don't form a bond. This kind of girl, this 5% girl, they don't form a bond. They can be with you extracting your resources for 10 years and they're still entirely indifferent to you on an emotional level. It's remarkable. Like we as Westerners, again, we don't have girls or even guys at this level. We just don't have it. And all of a sudden, that's all you see, right? So anyway, I want to emphasize again, most Russian girls are fine. Russian culture is good. Most Russian girls are fine. But again, the ones that are available at a certain time, oh man, they're often off the charts. And that's why, and you'll see comments probably on this video of guys that are jaded. They've been, gone in with an open heart. They've gone in with good intentions, and they've just been fucking chewed up and spat out. And I've heard a lot of stories, right? I'm speaking Spanish most of the time at the moment, so I can't speak English all of a sudden. I've heard a lot of stories from guys, right? So I'm a bit of an information hub. Guys want to talk to me. They want to tell me their stories. I get emails. I have dudes come up to me in the street. I have friends of friends want to tell me their stories and discuss it with me and whatever. So I get a lot of intel. I get a lot of examples. And mate, they're not very good. It makes me darker on the whole situation than I was before, to be honest. And of course, people with a good result aren't going to necessarily want to seek me out to tell me, but I've just heard a lot of horrific stories, and it all comes down to guys dealing with this kind of girl. So remember, the key is how much do they sexualize themselves, yeah, relative to other girls in their culture. That's all you need to know. That's 95% of the story. And if she's in that top kind of 10-15% of self-sexualization, oh man, just steer clear.